All right, welcome back to Prayer of the Barren Womb. It's been a long time since my last posting, and I've been sick for about a month, and for half that time, my voice was gone. I mean, just whispers and croaks. It's just beginning to come back. So I wanted to just post something just to get back into the flow of content creating for my channel, and just to remind people, if this is your first visit to my channel, or if you've been waiting for me to post something again, I want to bring the storyline back to the original intent, which was the 4 rivers of Eden. That was what the theory that I've been presenting has been all about. And then I've wandered off into some tangents, but I want to get back to the 4 rivers. And to do that, I just want to recap a little bit and remind people of the theory that I'm presenting. I first thought of this as a result of Yeshua, Jesus, teaching, I think it's in John 7, where he says, out of your inmost being will flow rivers of living water. And for the first time, the plurality of rivers caught my attention. And I thought to myself, well, it would have been fine had he said, out of your inmost being will flow a river of living water. That would have been meaningful. That would have been a direct connection to the river of life. But he says rivers, plural. And I got to thinking about, Hebrew roots and where your mind goes as a Hebrew roots investigator. And what we want to recover in the Hebrew roots is the mindset of the time period in which the Gospels and the epistles were written. And so, excuse me, people listening to Yeshua 2,000 years ago as he taught these sermons, their minds would have gone to first appearance of the word rivers in the Bible. And so you go there and you discover these 4 mysterious rivers in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10. And so I was thinking, well, that's these 4 rivers have always been very perplexing to me, and just kind of a splinter, it's like one of those little splinters that you don't really notice it's there until you bump something. And so I wanted to investigate what these 4 rivers might mean. And one of the layers that fit nicely over the 4 rivers is I discovered an additional 3 Adams in Genesis chapter 2. There had always been the default Adam that you and I are familiar with. And this is, Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1. Let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And so this is the default Adam that everybody has. And it's the picture of smiling, happy Adam and Eve with smiling, happy animals all around them. And, strategically positioned behind a bush so you don't see, their parts. Anyhow, that's the Adam that everybody has in their mind when they think of Adam and Eve. But as you progress through the story of the creation narratives in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, you discover an additional 3 Adams. And these are the Adams of Genesis chapter 2 that are distinct and different from the Adam and Eve of Genesis chapter 1. Because the first Adam you encounter in Genesis chapter 2 has no capacity to bear fruit, to bring forth image and likeness. And so I called him barren Adam. So we meet barren Adam, then we come to these 4 rivers, and then we meet the second Adam of Genesis chapter 2, the third Adam overall. And this one I call lonely Adam, because that's what God calls him. He said, it's not good that man should be alone. Let us make a helpmate suitable to him. And so you would think that the next event that you would read about in Genesis chapter 2 is the creation of Eve, but you don't get the creation of Eve. You get this long drawn out process of naming all the animals and causing the animals to appear before Adam. And so what I believe is happening here is that Adam is realizing that there's always a pairing for each animal that is brought to him for him to name. There's a male and it's female. And it's beginning to dawn on him that, for every bull, there's a cow. For every ram, there's a ewe. For every buck, there's a doe. And he's a king, where's his queen? So I think what begins to dawn on him as he's seeing the pairings of animals as they're brought before him is what's being highlighted is loneliness. And he's realizing that there's no helpmate suitable to him in the animal kingdom. That in order for a partnership and a pairing for him, something has to be taken from his own substance. And so we encounter the first deep sleep of Scripture. It's a very curious word. It's only found twice in the Torah. But this is the first of them. And out of this deep sleep comes the bride. And so we meet the third Adam of Genesis chapter 2 and the fourth Adam of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And this one I call bridegroom Adam. And each one of these Adams are substantially different from one another. And once we get to bridegroom Adam, he's forever changed. You can't go back and recover pre-Tardema Adam. You now have the woman, the female, being separated from the very substance and essence of Adam. And so he recognizes this pairing, this partnership, as essence of my essence and flesh of my flesh, and realize that this is his helpmate. So it's interesting that we have 4 Adams in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and we have 4 rivers. And so I started to layer these Adams on top of the rivers and just kind of let my mind wander. And I was thinking, okay, it seems as if each one of these Adams show up downstream in a type. The first Adam, of course, is default Adam of Genesis chapter 1. And what we find is that his world quickly devolves into anarchy, chaos, and evil and has to be destroyed because mankind has rejected God's design and purpose for his life. And so we have a do-over. We have a complete existential crisis for humanity. And the world is wiped out by a flood, which requires, in my theory, it requires the second stream of life, the second river of life, who's represented for us as Noah. And we find that Noah's world also quickly devolves into chaos and rebellion. But God has tied his hands. He's not going to destroy humanity again, but he is going to judge humanity. And what he does is he takes the tool of creation, a uniquely human characteristic that I believe reflects spirit, or what differentiates spirit from soul is language. Yeah, that's downstream. Anyhow, God destroys and judges language at the Tower of Babel. And so this second judgment event, worldwide judgment event, just as the flood was a worldwide judgment event, the destruction of language was a worldwide judgment event, which requires a third river of life. But now the rivers look different. And what we find in the story of Adam is the third river. And what we're going to be looking for as we move forward is another worldwide judgment event that requires another river of life. So we're going to put that aside for right now. Just keep that on the back burner. But I wanted to touch on Abraham, because he is the template for the life of faith. He's what the life of faith actually looks like. And so we get a deeper investigation of what the life of faith looks like in the epistles of Paul. And I believe Abraham exemplifies patterns for us. Galatians 2:20. What we in the church, whether it's SEC or Hebrew Roots or whatever flavor you're from, we would identify this patterning as Galatians 2:20. And we call it the crucified life. Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life which I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and delivered himself up for me. And Paul uses this kind of language in several of his epistles, speaking of our identification with the death of Yeshua Messiah on the cross, And we've summarized that idea from the epistles as the crucified life. And what I see in Abraham is the primordial template for the crucified life. Now Abraham would not have understood crucified. The cross as an implement of torture and death didn't even get invented. If my research, if I remember accurately, somewhere around 400 to 500 years before Christ is the earliest mention of this type of cruel death. So, 1,000+ years after Abraham, is there such a thing as crucified? But he's still the pattern for the crucified life. And what do I mean by this? Turns out that the life of faith, the life of following after our Creator, requires us to die to aspects and elements of our firstborn nature. Our firstborn nature is the nature that we all inherit when we enter this world, and it's comprised primarily of soul and flesh. We do have some remnants of the realm of spirit, but this spirit realm, Paul talks about this realm of spirit, that you were formerly dead in your trespasses and sins. He's not talking to a bunch of stiffs. He's not in a morgue. He's talking to a living, breathing body of believers, and he tells them that they were formerly dead. Their spirit connection to God had been severed as a result of rebellion, but they're still spiritual beings. And so this firstborn nature that we enter the world with when we take our first breath and continue on our journey of maturity, this is the nature, the default setting of Adam as he fled from the presence of God. That's what we inherit in Adam, is this default setting of fleeing from God, thinking we got this all together in the power of our own intellect and strategies and whatever. It's this firstborn nature that has to die. And we continue to learn how to die to our firstborn impulses as we progress in our walks with God. Abraham exemplifies this in just about every story that you read, beginning in Genesis chapter 11 and on through till Genesis chapter 24. That every narrative that we get of Abraham is another facet of what it means to die to yourself. Let's look at the most famous one, the Lech Lecha. Go forth, Abraham. Get out, away from your family, away from your culture, away from your land, and go to a place that I will show you. So how is this a death to self? Abraham's identity is wrapped up in the life of his family. And, he was a pagan. He was brought up, and the Midrash, the Jewish Midrash, the discussions of Abraham's life tell us, and this is just, tradition, and it's not chapter and verse, but they tell us that Terah, Abraham's father, well, at that time he was Abram, was an official in the court of Nimrod, and in fact built idols. That was his craft. And so we know that he comes out of Chaldees, Ur of the Chaldees, and God calls him away from all of his religious traditions, his cultural identity, his family identity, his land that he would have inherited or built upon. God calls him away from everything that Abraham understands or identifies as a portion of who he is. And so we can clearly see this idea of crucified. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live. In this story, in the opening story of Abraham, as he departs, he's dying to his past. He's coming out of all that he understands to be tradition and religion and knowledge and land and everything. He's coming out of that, and he's stepping out in pure faith to a land that God is going to show him. He doesn't know where it is. But, think about the journey that he's on now. He's left the Fertile Crescent. This is where the Chaldeans lived, and they lived there for a reason, because the land was so flush and fertile. The soil was thick and dark and replenished every year in the spring floods, and you're able to harvest abundant food. through animals and crops. So he's leaving this lush place of fertility and marching off, he doesn't know where. And when he gets to, what we have come to understand as the promised land, the land of Israel, I mean, think about the disappointment he probably would have encountered. It's like, this is baking oven heat, it's rocks, it's, dust, it's scorpions, it's pit vipers. I got to dig wells rather than just let my animals go to the edge of the river. Everything about this land is rocks and barrenness, and it's like, really, this is what I left, this fertile basin for this. That would have been, I would have like, this is what this is the land of promise. What's going on here? So disappointment is another part of the walk of faith. I'm sure he encountered disappointment as he's looking at this land of promise. That it's like, wow, ooh, is God a used car salesman? What is this? I'm sure some of these thoughts went through his mind, and so he's got to die not only to his past in that opening storyline, but as he moves into the land that's being given to him, he's got to die to his expectations of what he thought he was probably going to encounter when he entered. So we see these templates and these patterns being laid down for us in Abraham's life. And that's not the only one. He's encountering famine right away. That's his first narrative as he leaves home, this place of lush, beautiful, fertile soil and everything like that. His first story is an encounter with famine. And what's he going to do? And we're not told exactly. I mean, he has to go to Egypt to get food. Should he have stayed in Canaan and trusted God for provision? Well, yeah, that's a possibility, but he didn't. He goes down to Egypt. And we find out that Abraham has still got flaws in his character. He and his wife work out a plot that because she's a beautiful woman, his life would be jeopardized by those who would seek to kill him and take her. And so they put their heads together, and actually it's his idea, and she submits to it. Tell everybody you're my sister. Which, it's not, it's kind of a great, yeah, she was his sister, but, let's just leave out the wife part. So it's not like this huge lie, right? But it's not truth. And this is the thing that's got to be uprooted from the human heart. God desires truth in the inmost parts. And what we find in our own hearts is deception and cutting corners and gray zone. And, so he's got character flaws. And during the famine, he not only loses the land of promise, he loses the means by which a nation could be formed. Even though she's barren, he loses access to the land. He loses his wife to the harem of Pharaoh. God visits Pharaoh's house with plagues, and they finally figure out what's going on. And Pharaoh says, get out of here. Here's your wife. Take presents, take, servants. And so Abraham leaves the land of Egypt, and, our next story in his plot, I mean, if you think about it, this is also a death to self. God makes these magnificent promises to Abraham, and he and his wife are barren. And he's taken his nephew Lot under his wings. And so the thought, I would imagine, it's not written for us clearly, but I would imagine that Abraham considers Lot his legacy. That the promises that God gave to him are going to descend upon Lot. But Lot's got some problems too. And so we find strife between the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Abraham. And this can't work. And Abraham invites Lot, you go this direction, I'll go the opposite direction. And so Lot chooses from his own flesh resources, his own strategies, his own mind. He looks around, okay, what am I going to do? Rocks, dust, scorpions, pit vipers, digging wells, or, oh, hey, the Garden of Eden, Sodom and Gomorrah looks like the Garden of Eden. I think I'll take this. I'll take, the land of Eden and the waters of the rivers of Sodom and Gomorrah, and it'll be a piece of cake. So Lot, out of his own flesh man, his own firstborn nature, decides with the seeing of his eyes and doing the math in his own mind, in the realm of soul, not consulting the Spirit of God, chooses the lush green landscape as opposed to the barren rocks that Abraham gets to inherit. So Abraham lets him go. And this is another story of I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and delivered himself up for me. Abraham is letting go of the most logical inheritor of his promises. He's got nothing now. His wife is barren. The most logical inheritor of these great promises just went to one of the most wicked places on the planet. And, he's scratching his head. He's like, all right. But he's willing to trust God with Lot. And we find out there's political problems in Sodom and Gomorrah. We find out that 4 kings are going to come against 5 and take Lot captive. And we're going to get word back to Abraham that his nephew Lot has been taken captive by these wicked kings. And there's another Galatians 2:20 episode for us. It's like, am I my brother's keeper? Am I going to die? Abraham could have made the choice. It's like, man, that guy's a knucklehead. What was he thinking? Well, good luck, Lot. But he doesn't. He is his brother's keeper. And he goes on this absurd rescue mission at risk to himself and 318 dudes that he recruits. And they were probably telling him, are you sure? This guy's, he's a little bit, he's a few fries short of a Happy Meal. And so Abraham is able to recruit 318 men to go up against 4 victorious kings, take Lot captive, and they rout the kings. They send them north. I think we read that it's as far as Damascus, which is like this. I don't know how many miles it is, but I think if I remember, it's like 25 miles. They rout these kings and drive them into flight for 25 miles. That's an amazing victory. He rescues his nephew, brings him back, and Lot goes with Sodom again, the second time. He rescues his nephew at great personal risk, dying to his own interests, considering his brother is more important than himself. All these thoughts that we see in the life of Abraham are developed for us in the epistles of Paul. And to me, Abraham's life, story after story, is a picture of the crucified life. And it doesn't stop there. Lot goes back with the king of Sodom. And for the second time, Abraham loses his most logical inheritor. And, can you imagine the disappointment? Man, I sure thought things were going to go differently. I was, I rescued him and he goes with Sodom again? Are you kidding me? So just disappointment, and it's just like befuddlement, and it's like, God, what are you doing? What's going on with my life? And God comes to him, says, don't worry about a thing, Abraham. I'm your reward, your great promise. I'm your shield. I'm your very great reward. And Abraham's like, what are you talking about? The inheritor of my estate, the promises, is going to go to a servant in my household. And God says, no, it's not going to be. It's going to come from your own loins. This child is going to come from you. And, it's like, how do I know this is going to happen? And we get the covenant of the pieces, where Abraham splits the animals in half, and he goes into his tardema, his deep sleep. And there he's given a terrible prophecy, a terrible dream of the future of his family, and horror and deep darkness. And, God, the understanding that I have at this present level is that the fiery torch and the smoking oven that passed through the pieces was the Father and the Son stepping in on Abraham's benefit and walking through those torn pieces, those cut up pieces, and say, this be upon me if Abraham fails in his covenant, or his kids. If any one of Abraham's kids fail in the covenant, put that on me. And so that's my understanding of what the fiery torch and the smoking oven are, is the stand-in. Our Yeshua stands in on our behalf and says, if they break the covenant, I'll bear the consequences of their sin. And so when Abraham awakens, his Eve is brought to him in the same way that Adam's Eve was brought to him after his tardema, after his deep sleep. It's Sarah. The whole time it's been Sarah. But now Sarah is looking upon her barrenness in the same way that Eve is looking upon the beauty of the fruit. We're living in the upside down now. And Sarah is looking upon her own barrenness instead of meditating upon the promises. And she goes, this can't be. If these great promises came to Abraham, well, it's obviously not going to happen through me, even though she's Eve. She's the one that God brought to Abraham after his great tardema. But she's looking around, and she's in her natural mind, and she goes, well, this just can't happen through me. Here, take Hagar, my Egyptian bondwoman, and become husband to her. Perhaps I can be built up through Hagar. And so we see failure in Abraham's life where he submits to the plan of Sarah. And this is what we always will bring forth in the nature of our own flesh and in not heeding the voice of God. We will always bring forth Ishmael. And God honors the free will choices we make, and he lets Ishmael fester and blossom into a great nation, and they've been a thorn in the side of the children of promise ever since. So Ishmael comes forth. In a way, this is Abraham's second child. If Lot was his first adoptive son, Ishmael is his second son. And Abraham loves Ishmael. And we find out in the storyline that he considers Ishmael to be the inheritor of his estate, which includes the promises of God. In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And so Ishmael, in Abraham's mind, in his natural state, in his firstborn mentality, he's looking at Ishmael as the child of promise, not realizing that God is going to do something far greater. And so, we go through some various storylines. We get the covenant of circumcision. We get the challenge of Hagar and Sarah. Then we get the hospitality narrative in Genesis 18. Then we see what happens next. Then we have the Lot storyline, where Lot is being rescued from Sodom and Gomorrah. It's great destruction. I got to tell you, I really appreciate God rescuing Lot. I've had some further insights on the nature of Lot and my own nature, and I'm really grateful that Lot was credited with righteousness, and he gets rescued from Sodom. Anyhow, that's for another video, if I even share that with you guys. But it's like this continual process of death to self. Abraham has to die to his to the idea that Lot's his inheritor. He has to die to the idea that Ishmael is his inheritor. And he doesn't like this idea at all. But at the weaning of Isaac, when Sarah finally gets pregnant, conceives, brings forth Isaac, at the celebration of Isaac's weaning, Ishmael is mocking, and apparently there's some kind of violence. There's some seething anger and violence in Ishmael that Sarah recognizes and says, you got to get rid of this kid and his mom. They will have no part of the inheritance of me or my son. And you know what? The last time Abraham listened to Sarah, things didn't go so well. And he's mad. He's like, what are you talking about? Ishmael's my firstborn. And he's upset about the idea of getting rid of Hagar and Ishmael. And he goes and consults. Finally, instead of just, listening to what Sarah had to say and not consulting the Lord, he doesn't listen to what Sarah has to say and does consult the Lord. And the Lord just spins him around 180 degrees and says, no, this time you got to listen to Sarah. She's right. Your inheritance is going to Isaac, not Ishmael. What? And Once again, Abraham, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and delivered himself up for me. Once again, Abraham has to die to the idea that he has, that Ishmael is his inheritor. He's got to die to that idea. And so he, the sages point this out, he very grudgingly and just barely passes this test. Sarah tells him to cast out the bondwoman and her son, divorce her, have nothing to do with, she will not come under the shadow of this tent. And what does Abraham actually do? He sends her away. He sends her away. And shout out to Rabbi David Foreman for his teaching and understanding on this. But he sends her away with, a bottle of water and a loaf of bread with the idea that, don't worry. Kind of this is kind of the behind the story. What's going on in the backdrop there is like, don't worry about this Hagar. Let it blow over. By the time you're out of the food I give you, come on back. Things will be fine. And so she gets lost. She doesn't. So anyhow, that's a very cool story. Big shout out to Rabbi David Foreman for opening my eyes to some of these understandings. And now Hagar is lost in the desert, and she thinks she and her son are going to die. God points out a well, and Ishmael and Hagar are off on their own now, and he's got an Egyptian wife, and he's building his own name and his own family. But man, there's got to be a lot of bitterness in that kid's heart, a lot of hatred towards Isaac. Man, that was a rough one. But this is the story. This is the pattern of faith. This is what it looks like to die to yourself and all your dreams and all your hopes. And it doesn't even stop there. My last exploration into Genesis, we're about to get to the Akedah. And I don't even know if I'm qualified to teach on that, but it's the story of the binding of Isaac, where God, things are cruising along, maybe life, things have settled down to the point where Abraham can coast. He can take it easy now. The son of promise is turning into a man. And out of nowhere, he hears that voice again that he recognizes so well. Abraham, Hineni, here I am. Take your son, your only son whom you love. Take him to a place and offer him up to me. Whew. Are you kidding me? Talk about, this is the cross. Abraham is experiencing the spikes being driven into his hands and his feet. He's experiencing the scourging fire of whips coming down on his back. This is the cross. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me, God? You want me to offer up Isaac, the child of promise? You want me to give him up too? Yes. You have to give him up too. Yeah, and Abraham, I don't even know where this comes from. I don't even know anybody who's even close to this level of faith. But Abraham, next morning, first thing, like a bullet out of a gun, takes his son, 3 days journey. And you know the story of the ram caught in the thicket. But he has bound his son. His son and he have positioned themselves on an altar. Abraham is about ready to drag a knife across the throat of his son. Isaac is cooperating. Abraham's an old man, and Isaac's probably about 30 to 35 years old at this point, and it's like he could walk off. He says, I'm not doing this. You're crazy. And so that's the whole thing about that story that's fascinating. But we see there that the shadow type of our Heavenly Father and his precious only begotten Son, collaborating in the redemption of humanity. And that ram caught in the thicket, caught in thorns, giving its life in behalf of Isaac. So Abraham's life, start to finish, is a template of Galatians 2:20. And it's what each one of us must. This is the path. There's no shortcuts. There's no easy way. I'm not speaking to you from a position of great sanctification in my own life, I tell you straight up, there's not much sanctification in me. But I can clearly see from these stories the path towards sanctification, and it doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. Till we breathe our last, we're going to be, Paul talks about, I die daily. I take up my cross daily. Yeshua says, take up your cross and follow me. And so we're going to encounter these points in our life where we're clearly being called to lay something down. May not even be a bad thing. May not even be the wrong thing. May be like an Isaac in our life, but we have to let go of that too. Shout out to Otto. Shout out to my friend Otto. Talking about how Abraham laying down Isaac is like Gandalf refusing to take hold of the ring of power. Abraham refusing to let go of Isaac, too dangerous. It's like, no, I can't even hold on to the most powerful and precious thing. Isaac is the ring of power. He is, the promised one. He's the one through whom the entire world, all of humanity is going to be blessed. And I have to let go of him too. So I guess I just wanted to post something right now. Still not in great shape. But I want to just get something on the record, send it out there, let you know I'm still alive, and consider rereading the story of Abraham, beginning in Genesis chapter 12 and going on through about Genesis chapter 24. And I think you'll see the cross again and again and again as the backdrop of the life of faith and the stories that Abraham encounters. So I'd encourage that. Anyhow, thanks for those those of you who are still following this channel. I appreciate your checking in and watching the content that I'm putting together. Yahovah bless you and keep you. Yahovah cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yahovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And hope to see you again. Thank you for your time.